Hello and welcome to Design Emergency. I'm Alice Rawsthorn, and for this special episode, my friend and fellow founder of Design Emergency, the wonderful Paola Antonelli, and I will celebrate Ada Lovelace Day by discussing the legacy of its incredible namesake, the 19th century British mathematician who's hailed as the first computer programmer, thanks to her contribution to Charles Babbage's pioneering mechanical computer, aptly named the Analytical Machine. As well as toasting Ada Lovelace herself, Paola and I will salute the achievements of other inspiring women tech designers who followed her. But first, a brief introduction to Ada, whose early life would sound suspiciously like a bonkbuster novel if it didn't happen to be true. She was born in 1815 to Annabella Milbank, a wealthy heiress, turned social reformer and anti-slavery campaigner, and the renowned poet and notorious scoundrel George Gordon Byron, better known as Lord Byron. He lived up or down to his mad, bad, dangerous to know reputation so remorselessly that Milbank divorced him after a year, and unusually for the time was given sole custody of 5-week-old Ada. Byron died 7 years later while fighting in the Greek War of Independence. By her teens, Ada had developed a fine intellect and a rare gift for mathematics, which her mother encouraged her to pursue. She met and impressed Charles Babbage in 1833 at one of the Saturday night soirees in which he shared his progress on the Analytical Machine, which at that point he envisaged simply as being a number-crunching calculator. Ada was more ambitious for it, and she encouraged him to explore the possibility of using it to also encode information, thereby establishing her claim to be the first computer programmer. By then, she'd married William King, who soon became Earl of Lovelace, making her his countess. They had 3 children, including 2 boys, George and Gordon, named after her father. Ada continued to lead an unusually dynamic life for a wife and mother of that era, pursuing her passions for science and computing while developing a shockingly expensive love of gambling. Sadly, she died of cancer at the age of 36, but has inspired other women ever since. And since 2009, the second Tuesday of every October has been celebrated worldwide as Ada Lovelace Day, as a tribute to Ada herself, of course, but also to the other women who excel in science, technology, engineering, design, and Ada's beloved mathematics. Paola.
I can't believe how much she was able to achieve in 36 years. Ada, as I say, you always correct me to Ada. I'm going to try to say Ada, but truly she stands as an example for all women in tech and all women worldwide and in all times. And so her audacious claim that machines might one day compose elaborate and scientific pieces of music, this is what she said at some point, so foreseeing she was, made me think of Fei-Fei Li, whose work has made machines see. And not see as a metaphor, but as a capability that unlocked modern AI. So Fei-Fei is best known for conceiving and leading ImageNet, an open data set of 14 million images, all rigorously labeled across 20,000 categories. ImageNet provided the scaffolding that computer vision had lacked. It did not invent deep learning, but it turbocharged the field. And when researchers trained new neural networks against its scale and its taxonomy, error rates in object recognition plummeted. And that step changed, which was demonstrated spectacularly in a 2012 conference in Lake Tahoe that many consider a turning point for learning models and AI, enabled the cascade of visual intelligence that we now take for granted, from photo search and accessibility tools in computers and phones to quality control in manufacturing, medical imaging aids, and even robotics. Crucially, Fei-Fei has always paired technical ambition with a humanistic frame. She founded AI for All to widen participation in AI, especially for girls and underrepresented students, because who gets to build the tools determines what those tools are for. And at Stanford University, as co-director of the Human-Centered AI Institute, she argues that AI must be designed with, not merely applied to, society. It must be grounded as interdisciplinary by default, accountable by design, measured not only by accuracy, but by dignity, equity, and public benefit. It's the dream of a value-based AI. As a designer, I pay attention to what Feifei designs besides code: institutions, pipelines, norms, and also new spaces. ImageNet was a project in knowledge organization and crowd infrastructure. AI for All is a project in pipeline repair. The Human-Centered AI Institute is a design project in governance and translation, building common ground between computer science, law, medicine, philosophy, and the public sphere. And in 2024, she co-founded World Labs, and I quote, a spatial intelligence AI company building large world models, LWMs, to perceive, generate, and interact with the 3D world. We'll have to wait and see. And of course, her work also surfaces hard questions that we have often tackled in Design Emergency in our interview and must continue to press. For instance, how do we mitigate bias when data sets themselves reflect a biased world? And what are the boundaries of surveillance when vision systems exit the lab? And who is accountable when models fail in the wild? How can we cope with the damning carbon footprint of the whole utopian AI field? So Feifei has not solved these challenges, none of us have, but she has insisted early on and consistently that excellence in AI includes ethical architecture and civic imagination. For Design Emergency, this is the lesson that design of the AI is not neutral. It is a cultural act that organizes attention, resources, and rights. And Feifei's contribution is a blueprint for how scientific rigor and humanistic responsibility can and must advance together. On to you, Alice.
Wow. Well, what an incredible woman, and how wonderful to discuss her in the context of Ada Lovelace and her legacy. I'm going to race back in time now to the very late 1930s and the early 1940s to World War II and another extraordinary group of female tech pioneers. And they are the several thousand women who made a huge contribution to the British war effort through their top secret work in cracking codes and designing and building computers and other code-breaking gizmos at Bletchley Park, a dilapidated English country house that had been bought by the British government to house its wartime code-breaking activities. Now, decoding top-secret communications between Germany and its fellow Axis powers was vital to Britain and its allies throughout the war. But predictably, the white cis men in charge of British secret services initially planned to appoint, surprise, surprise, other white cis men to staff Bletchley Park, ideally what they called men of the professor type, preferably those who'd been educated at Oxford or Cambridge. So, when it became clear, as it had been since the outset, or should have been, that this would be impossible at a time when so many men in Britain had been drafted into military service, they reluctantly decided to recruit women, and predictably began with debutantes. Now, some of these debs did useful admin or clerical work at Bletchley Park, but there were very few Ada Lovelaces among them. So, Bletchley Park searched for female scientists, linguists, and mathematicians. At one point, approaching all the women who'd won prizes in a cryptic crossword competition run by the conservative Daily Telegraph newspaper. How times change, for the better in this instance. Now, although the most senior staff at Bletchley Park was still male, including brilliant computing pioneers like the great Alan Turing, by early 1945, 75% of the code-breaking workforce were female, 7,500 of them in total. And throughout the war, they became increasingly skillful and sophisticated in cracking codes and in redesigning, assembling, and wiring the Colossus computers that helped them to do so. Their work was always conducted in the utmost secrecy. Most of these women didn't tell their families about what they did at Bletchley Park for many years, decades even. Some of them never disclosed it at all. And for most of them, their cover was that they had joined the women's branch of the British Navy, the Wrens, as soon as they were recruited to Bletchley Park, which was, of course, all anyone else ever needed to know.
Well, it's so interesting how much this history was repeated also across the Atlantic, right? You know, there's the heroines, the hidden heroines that were celebrated in the movie Hidden Figures of 2016. So it's really, it keeps going, and we don't even know what happened elsewhere in the world. So I am going to move not too long in time, just a few years, but on the other side of the world. I'm going to move to Uruguay. So when we celebrate Ada, we remember not only the genius of invention, but also the courage to imagine entire infrastructures before they even exist. And one of these courageous pioneers is Ada Holz, a Uruguayan computer scientist that is often called the mother of the internet in Latin America. Holz's career began in the 1960s at a time when computing itself was still in its infancy. She studied mathematics in Uruguay, then specialized in computing in Mexico before returning home to build Uruguay's first university computing center. And her vision was always larger than machines or code. She understood that technology, if nurtured correctly, could become a connective tissue for knowledge, for democracy, and for national development. And her most transformative contribution came in the 80s and 90s, when she played a central role in connecting Uruguay, and by extension Latin America, to the global internet. At that time, when the region risked being left behind by the digital revolution because of its political and economic instability, Holz fought to establish networks that linked scientists, educators, and eventually ordinary citizens to the wider world. She led the computing service at the University of the Republic and was instrumental in joining Uruguay to Red Clara, the Pan-Latin American academic network. And thanks to her determination, Uruguay became one of the first countries in the region to achieve robust public internet connectivity. What makes her work resonate today is not only the infrastructure itself, but the philosophy behind it. Holz insisted that the internet must be understood as a public good, not a luxury commodity. She argued that it should serve knowledge, education, inclusion, not simply commerce or power. And in this way, she anticipated the debates we are still mired in about net neutrality, data rights, and digital sovereignty. Her recognition came late, but meaningfully, and in 2013, she became the first Latin American woman inducted in the Internet Hall of Fame. And yet, she never sought personal glory. She saw herself as a facilitator, ensuring that Latin America would not be excluded from the networks that were reshaping the planet. And for me, she embodies what it means to design not just machine, but whole futures, opportunities for connection. And if Ada imagined the creative potential of machines, Ada imagined the emancipatory potential of networks, and she built them against all odds. And now that connectivity is once again contested, and economic forces are pushing to fragment the internet and close networks. But her example reminds us that the internet is not inevitable. It is designed, it is governed, and it must be protected as a common good.
What an incredible story, and what an amazing woman. Fantastic to hear it, and also lovely to know that eventually she was given the recognition among her international peers that she richly deserved in the Internet Hall of Fame. I'm going to stay in the 1980s at the end of the decade, and this is another woman an incredible tech designer who anticipated behavioral change in terms of our relationship to technology and the new ways in which technology, specifically in her case, could build communities. And she is Stacy Horn. And when she was a graduate student at NYU on the Interactive Telecommunications program, she designed Echo, ECHO, all capital letters, which was a text-based bulletin board system, or BBS, on which people could flirt, gossip, and argue by searching for information and forging connections, as Claire L. Evans put it in her fascinating book, Broadband, The Untold Story of the Women Who Made the Internet. In other words, Stacy Horn wanted to create what we now call an online community, and Echo, short for East Coast Hangout, was a forerunner of Facebook and Instagram. She launched it in 1988, and it's worth remembering that that was 3 years before the first website surfaced. And Stacy spent her evenings trying to persuade complete strangers to sign up for Echo at New York parties, art openings, gigs and bars, and by running free computer classes in her apartment. As she couldn't find anyone who was willing to invest in the project, she spent almost all her savings on renting office space in the then decrepit Tribeca area, hiring a skeleton staff to work with her, and experimenting with cyberspace festivals and conferences, all of which would seem obvious additions to a project like Echo now, were much more unusual then. By the early 1990s, Echo had several thousand followers, or echoids, as they like to call themselves, and its modems overwhelmed Stacy's local phone service, so telephone engineers had to dig up her street to install underground cables as a dedicated Echo phone line. At its peak, Echo had 46,000 users, but usage then fell steadily as thanks to the mammoth investments made in Instagram, Facebook, X et al., plus a steady stream of well-capitalized independent platforms, online communities became generic. And a few years ago, Stacy Hook took the precautionary measure of donating 25 years of Echo's archive to the New York Historical Society as a vivid portrait of the optimism and excitement of the early digital age.
Well, I live and I walk over those hidden cables as I live in Tribeca, so I'm particularly happy to hear from you about a fellow neighbor. It's a fantastic story. So I'm going to move from Tribeca to Kenya to talk about Juliana Rotich, who embodies the same spirit of invention and vision as Ada's. I first encountered her work in 2008 when she had co-founded Ushahidi. Ushahidi, which means witness in Swahili, was an open source platform designed in the wake of violence following Kenya's disputed elections in that year. At the time, information about incidents of unrest was fragmented, censored, or simply invisible to the public. So Juliana and her colleagues designed a platform that allowed ordinary citizens to send SMS or emails reporting events. And those message reports were then geotagged and mapped in real time for citizens to be aware of. And what made Ushahidi radical was not only the technology itself, which was a fusion of mobile telephony, mapping, and open source software, but the model of crowdsourced participation. Ushahidi turned citizens into sensors and networks into a civic infrastructure for accountability and safety. Ushahidi has since been deployed worldwide to map the Haiti earthquake, to track crises in Syria, to crowdsource environmental data, and it became the template for what we now call crisis mapping, a field that has reshaped humanitarian response, journalism, and civic tech. And because the platform was open source, it could be adapted by communities anywhere, a design choice as important as the code itself. Juliana carried this vision forward by designing Brick, which is spelled BRCK, a rugged, portable Wi-Fi device with an 8-hour battery and the ability to connect 20 devices at a time, which I must also add is in the MoMA collection. It was essentially a backup generator for the internet, a small black box that could connect to multiple networks, Ethernet, Wi-Fi, 3G, 4G, and switch between them seamlessly if one went down, which is quite common in parts of Africa. So the device was always on. And like Ushahidi, Brick was designed for resilience, enabling access to information even in environments where infrastructure was fragile or absent. In design terms, both projects were reconfigurations of power, both Ushahidi and Bricks, shifting the ability to document crisis and access knowledge away from centralized authorities and towards communities themselves. And Juliana's impact goes beyond these two projects. She also co-founded iHub in Nairobi, one of Africa's most influential tech incubators, jumpstarting a generation of African startups. She has been an advocate for digital rights, for climate resilience, for internet access as a public good, and in every role, she has insisted that technology is not just tools and code, but context and culture designed to empower and not to dominate. And for me, what Juliana Rotich shows is that some of the most important design work in technology is infrastructural. And if Ada imagined that machines could compose music, Juliana imagined that networks could compose truth and democracy, a polyphony of voices visible on a map, insisting that no one's experience should remain invisible.
Wow. I mean, we take getting instant information about whether it's crises or a wonderful celebration so much for granted now. And it's extraordinary to hear the story of a woman who reinvented her innovations in tech so often and has been so dedicated to it for so long. So my fourth and final salute to celebrate Ada Lovelace is a project dedicated to empowering the Adas of the future, and it's Black Girl Gamers, which aims to to provide a fun, safe space in which Black women and members of the LGBTQIA+ community who identify as women can play games, forge friendships, start collaborations, sharpen their skills, and campaign for greater diversity, inclusion, and representation in the still cis-male-dominated global gaming industry. It was founded in London in 2015 by Ada Lovelace, who's been a dedicated gamer ever since her uncle gave her a Super Nintendo when she was 6 or 7. And Black Girl Gamers began as a small Facebook group, but it's now a thriving multi-platform online gaming community with over 10,000 members in 10 countries. It partners with other gaming communities and brands including Google, Facebook, Netflix, Adidas, Spotify and others to improve the representation and experience of Black women and the LGBTQIA+ community in gaming. Black Girl Gamers also runs an annual online summit where members can discuss current issues and new development, as well as talent brokering services that identify suitable employment opportunities for its members. And last weekend, Black Girl Gamers celebrated its 10th birthday by throwing a party at Wherever Else New York Comic-Con. So happy birthday, Black Girl Gamers.
I wish I had gone to that Comic-Con. Why don't I go to all Comic-Cons, Alice? You have to remind me. They're the best.
Well, you are the New Yorker. But next year,
I know,
I'll be a better friend.
Tribeca Comic-Con, really. Yeah, no, you have to tell me. Anyway, I'm going to end my my celebrations with a person, an artist that I personally adore. Her name is Lynn Hirschman-Leeson, and she's a force of nature, always at the edge, always testing new grounds. She is and continues to be a pioneer who insists that art, identity, and technology are inseparable. And since the late 1960s, she has worked at the intersection of performance, film, and interactive media long before these intersections were recognized as a field. Her alter ego was Roberta Brightmore, and she lived and performed it over several years, wearing a blonde wig and heavy makeup, not only as an artistic exploration of life and constructed identity, but also as an examination of surveillance, data trails, and how personal information circulates, issues that today define our digital lives, but at that time were not yet on our periscope. In the 1980s and 1990s, she continued, and she began experimenting with artificial intelligence early on, with telepresence and with interactive video installation. Projects such as Lorna, there was an interactive video disc about an agoraphobic woman, and later works like Agent Ruby, which was a web-based AI character that evolved through its interactions with audiences, anticipated the conversational interfaces that we now casually engage with. Lynn was testing new technologies, staging critical questions about power, intimacy, and control in digital age, and her films, including the 2002 Technolust, which starred every avant-garde artist's favorite accomplice, Tilda Swinton, expanded her investigation to biotechnology, to cloning, and to the ethics of scientific innovation, especially as they affect women's bodies. Hirschman repeatedly put on the table the question of who benefits from technological process and whose voices are excluded or erased. And from a design perspective, her work shows that technology is not neutral. It encodes assumptions, desires, inequalities, biases, and her genius has been to embody these truths in compelling narratives and visual form, making them unavoidable for audiences. That's a very powerful way to be an artist in this world. And she revealed that identity itself is a design construct constantly mediated by tools, screens, and systems. She continues working. She continues getting reviews. She connects with DMs. She shows up for lectures and events that might be out of her perceived interest, just driven by unabashed curiosity and generosity. And in the same way that Ada Lovelace imagined the latent creative potential of machines, Lynn has persistently staged their human consequences. She belongs in a conversation about women in tech because she demonstrates that technology is never just hardware or software. It's culture, it's politics, and it is embodiment. And her career is a reminder that the role of the artist is not merely to adopt tools, but to anticipate their implications. And we close this episode on Ada Lovelace's birthday, having traced a line from her vision of machines composing music to the work of women that have reshaped culture, identity, and politics in our own time through technology. What their stories remind us is that technology is never abstract. It is always entangled with the emergencies of the present, from climate breakdown and mass migration to conflict, disinformation, the regression of human rights, and widening inequality. Our world is defined by crises that demand new ways of seeing, sharing, and acting. And the women that we have highlighted show that design and technology can be instruments of resilience and justice, but only if they are built with imagination, accountability, and courage. This is Ada's gift to us today, a reminder that futures are always being composed and that it is our responsibility to ensure that they are worth inhabiting. This is Design Emergency, and you have heard from Alice Rawsthorn and Paola Antonelli, and as always, you can find visuals related to this episode on our Instagram feed at design.emergency. We also invite you to explore our archive of episodes, conversations with designers, architects, thinkers, and activists from all around the world who are using design to address today's most urgent emergencies and build a better world for all species, all ecosystems, and all cultures.